So I moved out to the shop because this lure is ready to be contoured. Now you can probably see that these gills stick way out because they were just simply glued on top of a nice sanded blank. But what we really want is them to be smoothed right in, nice and slick. Now this lure happens to be a single cheek patch, but it still looks very, very good. Here's a lure that I actually bought from Greg Budd, and you notice how he contours his gills in. The main areas that you'll need to grind is right up here, right here, and at the tip of these side fins. So what I use to do that is this Milwaukee, it's kind of like a Dremel tool. It's got a little barrel sander on it, and this works really, really well. And the reason I use that, this is with the CA glue, it's really hard. Now, what I use for sandpaper is a piece of a sanding belt. So here's 80 grit, and I'm hoping you can hear that. It does take off some, but I've got a fair bit of material to go through. So I'm going to show you how this works. This is my favorite tool for contouring, and it gets the job done fairly quickly. So you got to be a little careful. Don't want to go too far. And eventually, what we're going to be doing is putting this filler on, and then we'll be using the sander. We won't be using this this Dremel-like tool when we've got this on. I didn't mention, I always wear a face mask as well. The dust coming off here is so I've got all the cheek patches sanded, contoured properly. I also sanded the very tips of these side fins. I also took the opportunity to trim off any of the 5-minute epoxy that I had put on to seal the holes. Now, unfortunately, it was more than 2 days, so it was a little bit more difficult to trim, but I did manage to trim with my razor knife. The one last thing that I'm looking at right now, you can see the lead pour hole. I gave that a bit of a sand. So one of the last things I'm going to do is where I've sanded to contour, I'm going to put a little bit more CA glue there, and want to make sure that I didn't sand through the dried coating. Sometimes it's impossible to tell how deep the CA glue has gone, so this is kind of a precautionary thing. So when this dries, just a few minutes, I might give it half an hour. I'm going to put some of this on the edges here, just to make sure I cover any little holes and stuff, and also around this area here. This has got to melt into and blend into just in front of the eyes. Okay, the CA glue has dried very nicely, nice and hard now, and to put some of this filler on it. And notice in the filler it was a little bit too thick with the lid just coming off a brand new container, and I had to mix a little bit of water to make it a little bit smoother and a little bit easier to spread. So these are the things you got to do to get it done. The idea of this this purple colored filler is that the filler turns white after it dries to let you know that it's dry, but it is very good filler, regardless of what color it is. Well, that looks pretty good. You can see the some of the purple is already starting to turn white, so it's starting to dry already. I've got plenty above the eye here. That's one of the very important spots. Put a little bit more at the tip of the fin. Alright, this guy is done as far as first coat of filler. Fair bit of sanding coming up. Most of my work will be done in the shop until this lure has its base coat of, actually 3 base coats of oil-based paint. And once the oil-based paint has been completed, I'll be showing you how to put a shiny aluminum foil on top of these gills. That's a bit of a challenge. And then I'll show you how to make the scales. The filler has dried. It's now nice and white instead of that beautiful purple color. And the first thing I'm going to do with it is I have a number of different sanding products. I have 80 grit, I've got some 100 grit, and I've got some 120 grit. Now this is that stuff that is the cut out from the belts, sanding belts. Got very thick back and keeps it nice and straight, and I love using this stuff, at least for the initial sanding. And then what I do is I go on to the ordinary paper products, and what I do is I cut these into little pieces and fold them, and that way that allows me to get into the edges along the fins and the gills. Now, before I get sanding, I thought I would show you where we're going with this lure. You want to give it 3 coats of oil-based paint. I use a paint called Tremplad, and this is what a lure looks like. This is not the same lure, obviously. And at the end of the day, as we get closer to the painting, this is going to look like this. So this lure is identical. I built them in batches, and sometimes I built them in batches of 4 or 6. But this lure here has the detail on the side fin, and it has the scales put in. Notice you don't put scales on side fins or on the cheek patches. And yeah, so this is what we're going to be doing. This stuff is a little crazy because of the way it glues on, and if you ever thought you might start to curse and swear, you certainly would consider it when you're putting this stuff on. So I'm not going to do a whole bunch of sanding on camera. I'll do a little tiny bit, but sanding is not that exciting. This 80 grit that I have right now is mainly to knock off the bigger lumps. And it goes through this filler pretty nicely. You can see the crosshatch now because the filler being white stays in the crosshatch, and you can kind of appreciate why I fill that crosshatch. This side is pretty much done. One of the things you have to be careful about though is to make sure you don't fill in that eye socket, and I just use a razor knife here and help clean it out. I always do a test fit, because the last thing you want to do is have to get in here and start scraping around when it's time to actually put in the eye. And that eye fits pretty darn good. So we're ready to start the other side. So I've sanded everything, and this is also a time when you want to start getting ready for your first coat of paint. So I also gave the body a sanding down to 220. One of the negative sides of the splitting of these two sides, you know, the hook in two pieces, is you get a glue seam. And as careful as you are gluing this, you can get the wood spot on, but you always get a little bit of glue spilt on top here. And you do your best to wipe it off with a tissue, but you always get some glue. And that's top and bottom. So one of the things you have to do is you're going to see that seam after the first coat of paint, and you're going to get all cranky, and then you're going to have to get the sandpaper out and get it down so you can't see it. So why not do it right now before the paint is on it? And what I mean by that is I'm going to put a little layer of filler, and I'm going to sand a little bit more and try and reduce the look of that split as best as I can. Chances are, by the time you get paint on it and 3 layers of epoxy, it probably will be very hard to see, but most often you can see them if you look real close. For somebody who's never seen these lures and picks it up, they would probably never notice them. So for this guy right here, since we're talking about gills, I've sanded here so this gill slopes into the head very nicely. I've sanded around this second gill to make sure that that's open, and when we put that aluminum foil on, we'll be getting in there and highlighting this area. I've also sanded around the eye. I've tested both eyes, they fit very nicely. But as I kind of predicted earlier in the series, these eyes take a little bit of work, and I can see 2 or 3 little gouges that are sticking out, so they're going to definitely need some more of the wood filler. Now, another thing to do at this time is to also fill in the lead pore hole. The reason that I use 2 different kinds of fillers is the Page's plastic wood is an alcohol based. It's when it hardens extremely hard. It's a very good filler, but it is a bit porous. So when you sand over it, it looks like it's flush, and then you paint on it and you see little pinholes in it. This filler is kind of creamy and kind of fills in those little holes. Also, when we're going to fill here right away, we might want to fill around the belly loop and the attachment point. The tail loop, I always do it so the glue is proud. I don't know if you can see that in the camera. And the glue sticks up a little bit. So there's really no work to do, because if you feel it's very smooth. So you don't have to use any of the filler on that. Alright, let's do some filler. So the lure has had all of its sanding, and I had to put a third coat around the eyes here because they're always a little bit hard to get just right. I checked the eyes to make sure they fit, and now we're getting on to the point where we want to put some base coats on. So this is ultimately what it's going to look like after it's done. I'm going to have 3 layers of oil-based paint, and this is the paint that I use. It's called Trim Clad. This happens to be a gloss paint, but I normally use semi-gloss. It doesn't really matter because it's going to get covered over with a bunch of stuff. It's pretty good paint. In Canada, we only have a limited number of oil-based paints. Most of the oil-based paints that you might use in the US for painting kitchens and stuff are no longer available to us for environmental reasons. So I'll be using this sprayer. It's a high volume, low pressure HVLP type sprayer. You open up the top, put a little bit of paint in it, and you set air pressure for about 60 pounds. Give it a spray, let it dry overnight, give it another spray. I put 3 coats of paint on my lures. The reason being that you can see the grain. It's not horribly dark, but it's dark enough. And every once in a while at 2 coats I go, isn't that good enough? And then I look at it in just the right light and I realize I can see the grain showing through. So I come back and I normally provide 3 coats on every lure. Now, the cleanup of these spray guns is considerable. If you keep your spray gun clean, you can use it for years. This one I have had for probably 8 years, and I'm very meticulous when I'm cleaning it up, and I clean out the tip, and I clean out the barrel, and of course I clean out the paint reservoir, and it just keeps working. I did have one many years ago in the middle of a spray paint job. Something went spring and I never did find what did that, so I had to replace it. But this one here has been around for quite a while. So the interesting thing about your first coat of paint, it's always disappointing. So you spend a whole bunch of time sanding and looking at it in different light to make sure you got everything just right, and then you give it a coat of paint. Well, I'll tell you, that first coat of white paint, it now shows everything. Every little ding, every little high spot. It's a humbling experience after your first coat of paint. So also the first coat of paint is a sealer paint. So what's happening is, as you sand, even with 220 paper, your sandpaper is cutting little strips of wood, and what happens, the ends become free, and even though you can't feel them with your fingers, the minute you hit it with paint and it dries, that little shredded end kind of curls up. So the first time you put your lure that you so carefully sanded and prepared in your hand, it feels like 220 sandpaper. It's so rough. And then of course you give it a quick sand with 220, and now it's starting to feel a whole lot better. And that first coat of paint is almost a test coat, because it really starts to show anything that you've missed. And you've got to really take care of everything that should be taken care of after that first coat, because you got 2 more coats, and the last coat you certainly, the second last coat and the last coat, you certainly don't want to be doing any sanding, because that makes the paint look a little bit dull. So I'm going to get going on that, and the next time you see this lure will be after the first coat, and I'll just show you how rough it is after.